Hey organics, it's Black Diamond. Hope you all had a happy turkey day. I for one am still full, and maybe that's why today I'm willingly walking into the theory minefield that my comment section has built. I ran a poll. Over 100 of you voted. The verdict was loud and frankly a little unhinged. You want Eve. Not just a cameo, not just a gag, but Eve as a central force in Hazbin's cosmology. And more specifically, a big chunk of you are convinced that Eve is Ru, the root of all evil that Vivziepop has been teasing for years. Personally, I'm not fully married to the theory myself. My instinctive reaction is, that's a lot of cosmological weight to hang on a character we've barely heard named in the canon. But if I'm going to call myself a media analyst, I do not get to dismiss a theory just because it's not my first reading. If the fandom is insistent, then it's my responsibility not to scoff, but to stress test it. So in this essay, I'm not arguing that Eve is Ru as a statement of canon. I'm doing something more interesting. I'm going to assume, for the sake of argument, that the theory could be true, and see how far it could be coherently integrated into the existing lore, visuals, and mythological scaffolding of the Vivziverse. If the structure collapses under its own weight, we know it's just a fun fanfic. If it holds, then we have to admit that there's real narrative merit there, whether or not the writers ever confirmed it. Think of this as a thought experiment in demonology and feminist reclamation, but make it a musical. Before we graft Eve into Ru, we need to understand Ru on her own terms. Ru enters the conversation long before she ever enters the show. Back in October 2019, Vivziepop posted a doodle of a new character and casually dropped that there was no one she was more excited to get into than Ru, while immediately warning that it was gonna be a, quote, long ass time before we saw her. In a reply, she sharpened that into a thesis. Ru is the looming threat in the distance, waiting. That is not neutral language. That is not fun side character I will sprinkle in later. That is structural language. Looming threat is the phrasing you use for an antagonist that sits at the architecture of the story, not just the plot. Over the years, that status has quietly calcified. Ru has been repeatedly framed as the root of all evil, a phrase that is doing about 3 different jobs at once: pun on root, theological reference to original sin, and a suggestion that her power is not situational but systematic. She is not a warlord, she is an underlying condition. Fast forward to 2025, then those early doodles crystallize into production realities. On Blue Sky, Vivzi announces that Ru has had her first recording session. This is not "we brainstormed a villain" or "we might use her someday." When Vivziepop started Hazbin, she hoped she would get to tell enough of the story to reach Ru, and now she exists. That is the creator admitting that Ru sits at the far end of the show's intended arc. Amazon has already renewed Hazbin for season 3 and 4. Vivziepop has said that she imagines the story running for about 5. Ru, then, is very likely a late-game piece. She's the kind of character you do not burn in season 2 because she's designed to land once the world is properly built. She is the reward for narrative patience. So, before we start anything about Eve, we can say this much with confidence. Ru is not a cameo. Ru is an endgame. She is framed as the embodiment of something primordial, systematic, and slow-growing. That language alone brushes up against the biblical story that gave birth to half of the misogyny in the Western world. Now let us return to the garden, not as a Sunday school morality tale, but as an origin myth for a horror series. In the classic Genesis narrative, the order of operations is clear. Adam is formed first from the dust. Eve is created from his rib as a helper, a partner. God gives Adam the explicit command not to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Eve, who is not present for that conversation, learns the rule secondhand. When the serpent tempts her, she misquotes the command, adding "do not touch" to a prohibition originally only concerned with eating, and not naming the tree explicitly. That small technical political wobble has always been fertile soil for theologians and misogynists alike. Eve believes the serpent, eats the fruit, and then offers it to Adam. In many modern interpretations, that sequence has been weaponized in a hierarchy of blame. Eve is framed as the origin of sin, the weak point, the one who brought down mankind. This is despite the fact that the text itself holds Adam responsible as the designated leader. God addressed him first, and later Jewish and Christian theologians repeatedly anchor the fall of humanity in Adam's disobedience, not Eve's alone. The double standard is baked in from the beginning. Eve is deceived, Adam is negligent, but culturally, Eve became the face of the crime. Now translate that into the Vivziepop. Hazbin already plays gleefully fast and loose with heaven's quality control. Adam, of all people, is the first human soul to get into heaven. He is a sexist, narcissist, functionally a war criminal, and yet he passes the gates while the narrative conspicuously refuses to discuss what happened to Eve. In a show that delights in calling out hypocrisy, that omission is loud. If Ru is the root of all evil, and if that title is not just branding but lineage, then one very clean way to literalize that theology is to say, when Eve bit the fruit, it didn't just alter the world around her, it altered her. It rooted itself, pun intended, into her flesh, her soul, her metaphysical DNA. Original sin did not just enter a ledger, it took up residence in a person. Under that reading, Ru's not a random cosmic entity. Ru is Eve after several thousand years of metabolizing blame, shame, and the knowledge of good and evil without any of the institutional forgiveness extended to Adam. She is the corruption that grew inside the woman everyone decided was the problem and kept growing long after humanity moved on to new scapegoats. I can see why the fandom is fixated on this. It takes a misogynistic origin story and flips it into a revenge arc, and we stand a revenge arc. One thing Hazbin does very intelligently is treat absence as text. The absence of Lilith in season 1 reads as suspicious because of how central she should be. Similarly, Eve's nearly non-existence in the main narrative is a choice, not an oversight. Biblically, both Adam and Eve are present at the beginning of human history. They make the same forbidden choice. They bear the same consequences. Yet in the show, Adam is elevated as heaven's golden boy, the first to pass through the pearly gates, the leader of the exterminations. He's not portrayed as righteous, he's petty and cruel, but structurally he's validated. Heaven has accepted him. He gets institutional power. Eve, by contrast, is not just dead, she's narratively muted. She becomes an off-screen ex whose most meaningful legacy right now is a punchline to Lucifer's "your second wife seemed to like what I had to offer too" humiliation bit with Adam. She exists as a reference, not a character. Now, when stories are built on the silence of one half of a fundamental pair, you should always ask why. Sometimes it is simple neglect. Hazbin, though, has already demonstrated with Lilith and Rosie that it enjoys holding powerful women just out of the frame until the moment that their presence recontextualizes the whole board. The deliberate way Lilith was sidelined, only for Rosie to rise into view, suggests Eve's absence may be functional. It creates a vacuum. It leaves space for a reveal. If Ru is the root of all evil, and if she is connected to the primordial sin of humanity, it is narratively elegant for her mundane identity to be the very woman history blamed and then forgot. Adam ascends and becomes heaven's attack dog. Eve descends and becomes hell's root system. Two halves of the same story exaggerated into caricatures of cosmic injustice. The Eve equals Ru theory does not break the show's existing pattern, it extends it. Hazbin loves to take marginalized or demonized figures from theology and give them a microphone, letting Eve return not as a gullible girl who ruined everything, but as the ancient architect of something far more terrifying, would be so very on brand. Here's where the theory finds its symbolic sharpness. Adam's reward and Eve's disappearance mirror a pattern that repeats throughout human history. Men ascending on the backs of women whose contributions are minimized, stolen, or rewritten. For every celebrated genius, we can often find a woman who did the work or did the work first and was buried under the gloss of a man's name. Mileva Merrick, the physicist who co-developed the mathematical framework behind Einstein's early papers, became a phantom behind a headline genius. Zelda Fitzgerald, the avant-garde mind whose diaries and words became the backbone of F. Scott Fitzgerald's work, was reduced to the wife who ruined him while he paraded her creativity under his signature. Margaret Keane painted those haunting, iconic Dwight figures, while Walter Keane signed his name to them and accepted the praise until a courtroom forced the truth to light. The world is full of Eves whose Adams took credit. Under the Eve equals Rue reading, Hazbin becomes a mythic echo of that reality. Adam ascends to heaven, validated and vocal. Eve descends, and that descent becomes subterranean, literally. She is the root system beneath the entire structure of sin, carrying the weight of blame while Adam stands on that foundation and smiles for the cameras. This is where the theory transforms from clever speculation into thematic justice. Eve, reimagined as Rue, is not just the root of all evil, she is the accumulated resentment of every woman whose legacy has been edited into silence. She becomes the primordial ghost of erased genius, of contributions punished rather than credited. If Adam can weaponize sexism into celestial authority, then Eve can weaponize corruption into an empire of the damned. Adam ascends as heaven's sword. Eve metastasizes into hell's soil. The theory does not bend Hazbin's existing framework, it amplifies its critique. If Eve returns not as the gullible mother of regret, but as the ancient mythic backbone of all infernal power, it would be less a villain reveal and more a literary correction. Under this lens, the eventual confrontation between Eve as Rue and heaven would not just be a battle, it would be the reckoning owed to every Mileva, every Zelda, every Margaret. The roar of the woman the world blamed, ignored and misnamed, finally taking credit for what she has always been told she ruined. She would be the retribution of erased brilliance blossoming at last. Now we have to talk about one of the most unsettling visual motifs across Hazbin and Hell of a Boss: the red eyes. They are everywhere, embedded in stone, peering from cracks in the pavement, infesting alleyways like mold that has learned to stare back. They cluster in the most corrupted spaces: Valentino's studio, Vox's empire, the Poison video where Angel is exploited on camera. They're especially dense in scenes of despair and degradation. The worse the moral atmosphere, the more eyes there seem to be. At the same time, there are certain spaces where those eyes are conspicuously absent. Fans have pointed out that they don't see them in Cannibal Town despite the murder and corruption, a community bound by unity and mutual survival. We do not see them in Lucifer's private quarters. We do not see them in the Hazbin Hotel itself. In other words, the eyes avoid pockets of genuine connection and hope, but swarm wherever hope has curdled into resignation. Layer on top of that another fan theory: when sinners are killed in hell by angelic weapons, they do not truly cease. They sink into the ground, their essence reabsorbed by the environment. If those eyes are the aggregated manifestation of damned souls, and those souls are somehow being harnessed by an entity whose symbol combines roots and eyes, then Rue's epithet as the root of all evil becomes almost literal. She's not just watching hell, she is watching through hell. Now marry that to Eve. Eve's sin in traditional stories is framed as the moment humanity gains the knowledge of good and evil. Knowledge in scripture is never just information, it's intimacy, awareness, perception. If that knowledge metastasized inside her and eventually became Rue, then the idea that Rue experiences hell through an omnipresent root and eye surveillance network is a darkly poetic extension of the original story. The woman who opened humanity's eyes now becomes the eyes that monitor its worst impulses. The visual logic holds. Theologically, it functions as a provocative reframing. Narratively, it creates an antagonist whose power is not brute force, but omniscient despair. Rue does not have to swing a weapon, she just has to let the world rot and drink in the fallout. One of the more interesting pieces in the biblical source material is the way Eve's sin is framed as qualitatively different from Adam's, despite both sharing the same ultimate consequences. The Apostle Paul explicitly notes that Eve was deceived, whereas Adam sinned knowingly. Eve is tempted by a distorted version of God's word. Adam receives the command directly, yet chooses to eat anyway. In many Christian traditions, this has led to a curious tension. Officially, Adam bears responsibility for the fall in the doctrine, but practically, sermons and cultural imagination often lay the emotional blame at Eve's feet. She is the one who brought sin. The theological language and the emotional rhetoric misalign. That cognitive dissonance has been used for centuries to justify generalized distrust of women, especially powerful ones, sexually liberated ones, and innovative ones. A divine double standard that lingers in the rhetorical bloodstream of Western culture. If we import that into Hazbin's cosmology and actually take it seriously as psychology rather than dogma, the potential for resentment is massive. Imagine being the person whose mistake has been singularly immortalized as the source of evil, even though your partner received the information first and chose badly with eyes fully open. Imagine watching that partner get rebranded as heaven's first successful story while you become, at best, the ex weaponized in arguments with Lucifer. That is not just tragic, that is maddening. Under that frame, Eve's hypothetical transformation into Ru is not just about corruption, it's about grievance. It's about centuries of unaddressed blame. Her crash out would be justified, not as petulance, but as accumulated trauma. Ru becomes what happens when a woman is told for millennia that she is the root of all evil and eventually decides to cash that check. Hazbin has already proved it loves taking the patriarchal narratives and exposing the cruelty by exaggerating them. Turning Eve into the root of all evil is the kind of spiteful symmetry this universe thrives on. If you're going to demonize her, the story asks, are you prepared for what that demon actually looks like when she makes her appearance? Ru, as described by Vivziepop, is not a mid-level boss. She is the looming threat in the distance. The root of all evil is not someone you punch once and move on. It's something you dismantle or succumb to. That scale matters for evaluating the Eve theory. If Ru is a wholly separate entity, she still slots comfortably into that description. She can be the remnant of the tree itself, a kind of cosmic fungus spawned from the knowledge humanity was never meant to hold. This is a solid interpretation on its own, but if Ru is Eve, who has over time become indistinguishable from the corruption she has unleashed, then the nature of the antagonist shifts from an external threat to a failed ancestor. She's not just attacking Hell's ecosystem, she is Hell's ecosystem, a growing and congealing consciousness. The eyes in the walls, the roots under the streets, the despair-saturated places where her presence is strongest, all that becomes the long tail of one choice. That is the level on which Hazbin likes to operate when it's at its most ambitious. My video about Rosie plays into the similar arena. She's not an overlord, she's a critique of Hell's soul-based power economy and the way old money hoards influence through aristocracy. Eve's Ru would be operating at a metaphysical tier above that. She is not leveraging souls, she is the soil from which the whole system grows. From a storytelling perspective, positioning Eve there would let the show do something interesting with its central premise. Charlie's project is about redemption, the idea that even the worst can be changed. What does redemption look like when applied to the root of all evil? Is Ru even redeemable, or is she the thing you must uproot for redemption to function to a higher degree? Those questions are narratively rich. They keep the theory from being a simple Eve is evil now twist, but instead makes her the philosophical examination the show has been building towards. Now, because we are not doing fan service for its own sake, let us admit where this theory has stains. First, there's the simple fact that Vivziepop has at various times described Rue as a character she did not plan to show in Hazbin or Hell of a Boss initially, but as a kind of background cosmological force. That has since evolved into a concrete role, but that creative lineage suggests Rue was conceived as more of an abstract entity than what Eve became after the fall. The development history does not scream this was always Eve in disguise. Second, the show already has a crowded pantheon of powerful female entities: Lilith, Rosie, the Seraphim, the Speaker, and possibly others we've not met yet. Folding Eve into Rue risks making the cosmology top-heavy if it's not handled with care. Not every archetype needs to be collapsed into one face. Third, there is the tonal question. Hazbin is irreverent, but it also takes certain lines seriously. Turning Eve into the root of all evil could be read as either a reclaiming of her story or an intensification of the old blame. The show would have to thread that needle very carefully to avoid reinforcing what it might be trying to critique. That said, what I find compelling and why I think this theory deserves exploration is that it aligns with Hazbin's existing habits rather than contradicting them. The series loves elevating the marginalized side characters of biblical myth, turning the theological footnotes into narrative juggernauts, using absence and misdirection to seed later reveals, ebbing visual motifs like roots and eyes as advanced notice of metaphysical players. With that pattern, Eve's Rue is not absurd. It's a plausible endpoint to the show's ongoing conversation with religious tradition. Whether or not it is what the writers intend, it is certainly something the text can bear. At this point, we can say this much. If Rue is, in fact, the root of all evil in a literal sense, and if those roots and eyes we see throughout hell belong to her, then she already functionally is the main antagonist. She just has not stepped into the frame yet. The moment she does, whoever she is, she will redefine the stakes. Now, if the show chooses to reveal that Rue is Eve, that revelation will not just be a lore twist, it'll be a thematic provocation. It will say the woman you all blamed was listening, was changing, and now she's here to make you live with the story you wrote about her. If the show doesn't make that move, the theory still leaves with us valuable tools for reading Hazbin as a text that plays with the afterlives of myth, with how stories about women are weaponized, and what happens when oppressed figures finally gain enough vantage point to rewrite their role. So no, I'm not telling you this is canon. I'm not stamping Eve is Rue on the Vivziepop Bible and calling it a day. I'm saying the fandom's obsession has teeth. The scaffolding holds. It's a theory that, when examined, refuses to fall apart. And if Rue eventually strolls into the frame with a bite taken out of a familiar-looking fruit, y'all are going to be insufferable about it. I just know. So drop your thoughts below. Do you want Eve as the root of all evil, or do you prefer Rue as a separate primordial entity with her own story? Does tying her to Eve feel like justice or like an overreach? And who else do you think the show is quietly holding just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to turn the lore on its head again? Either way, Organics, the roots are already under our feet. The only question now is who they belong to, and what are they getting ready to sprout?